Hello, today we'll be repairing this beast of a 10 horsepower Briggs and Stratton motor. So to begin with, I need to take the starter off in order to get at everything else. The starter's also got some problems. So I'm going to loosen one side, and then I'm going to loosen the other. With those out, I'll be able to move the starter, take the pulley off, and then I can just let it flop, and you can see the problem with the starter there. The flange is cracked. Now I want to take the cover off. It's pretty dirty inside. I need to clean it. So I crack that nut, and then I'm able to take the bolt out. Off it comes with the washer. Now I decided to use a pulley puller to pull off the pulley. I wasn't able to just tap it off. So here it comes. There it is off. There's the key still stuck in it. Now there's some bolts I need to get to behind this screen, so I'm just going to take the screen off. It's got 4 little screws. There it comes off. Now there's a number of bolts I need to remove. So this is how I do it. I lock the pulley with that little chisel there, and then I'm able to ratchet off the bolts. This is how I loosen the pulley. It's on there. It's a tapered fit, so I find you usually just have to jiggle it, and then it comes off pretty easily. No need for the puller on this. There's also this plate here. Now I'm going to be taking off the rest of it, the shroud. There's a bunch of bolts. I'm not going to show you all of them. On both sides, on the bottom, on the top, they're everywhere, those things. So I've loosened them all off, and now I can remove the shroud. This is going to let me clean it. There's a bunch of grease that was on the bottom, kind of accumulated dirt. So now I've cleaned it. At the time, I thought this would be enough and the engine would run. I have a lot more things to try and diagnose, though. But at this stage, this is what the reassembly looks like. You just put the shroud back on after having cleaned it. Then you go and you put the bolts back in. This is foreshadowing for the several more times I'm going to have to do this while diagnosing different problems. Then you just put the pulley back on, right onto the tapered shaft. Now you can add the bolts once more. There's 4 of them. You just tighten them up. I tighten in a star pattern. I decided to use a wrench for this. On goes the screen. Nothing is particularly tight because I wanted to test the engine, and if it worked, I would tighten everything up. But it didn't work, as we'll find out. Here's some anti-seize. I didn't want the pulley to be so difficult to take off, so I'm going to be using anti-seize. It contains little metal flakes, so even if the grease washes out, those flakes will still be there, and it'll make it so that the pulley it just won't rust to the shaft as badly. Now I have to hammer it on with the mallet, and I get it on, and then I put this bolt in, and then I try starting it with a rope several times, but I'm not able to make it work. So I end up having to diagnose it more. But at the time I didn't know that, so I continued the assembly. I'm now putting the starter back on. The starter is fairly heavy. I wish I had a block of wood that was just the right height, but I didn't. However, once you get those 2 bolts in, it will just pivot on those bolts, and it'll behave. Now I'm putting the nuts on the bolts, and I'm tightening them about finger tight. Now I'm going to put the pulley back on. I'm going to lever the starter back up so that I can fit the pulley over the sheath. Now that starter is on there pretty good. So now, there were some parts of the shroud that were taken off, quite a few actually, and it came like that. So I had the lawn tractor and the engine and some loose parts. So I looked at some part diagrams, figured out where they had to be. Unfortunately, these shroud pieces are held by the head bolts. I don't really like that arrangement. I don't like messing around with the head bolts, but it is what it is. So I loosen them off, then I tighten them back on. Then I add a little bolt and nut. This gives the starter a third point of support. And I believe this is probably why the flange cracked, is the starter was not supported very well. Now, this engine also didn't come with a carburetor, so I need to put the carburetor on. First step in that process is adding this intake pipe. Now I'm going to put the gasket on the carburetor, and I'm going to present it to the intake pipe. And they're going to nest together like so, and then I'm able to just bolt the carburetor onto the intake pipe. Tighten up those bolts. Now I'm trying to figure out the throttle cable. I had no references for this. I had to figure it out, so it took me a really long time. And if you are in the same position, I hope this video will help you, because, man, it's not fun figuring it out. Before I get into that, though, I want to put this breather tube on the carburetor. It takes a little bit of finagling. You kind of got to squeeze it into a C, but you can then put it in. So the engine wasn't producing spark. I thought at this moment that it was the gap on the magneto being too big. It is a pretty big gap. I'm able to fit the feeler gauges under that, like, really easily. Yeah, like, that's so much sloppage there. So at this juncture, I decide to adjust the magneto gap. You do so by just moving those nuts around, moving those bolts around until you get the right gap between the magneto and the magnet on the flywheel. This is how I measure the gap, is with a little feeler gauge. That didn't produce a spark though, so I decided that I would take apart the points and the condenser. So this is where the points and the condenser are. They're underneath that lovely little cap. Right now I'm unscrewing everything in there. I want to take the condenser off and I want to test it. The condenser is just a capacitor. So it's that thing, and you can see some corrosion, so I began to get a little suspicious of it. I thought something might be the matter. When I tested it, I didn't see any voltage jump when I applied resistance to it, so that told me there might be a problem. But I put it back together anyways. I wanted to test it, so here it is in the tractor. I added some gas to the engine, put the spark plug in. Now I'm going to start it. And there's no smoke or anything. You could see that the gasoline was just blowing out as mist. Now this, as a comparison, is what a good spark should look like. You can clearly see it. Here's another angle. You should be able to see the spark, and on my engine I couldn't. So I had to keep diagnosing things. On this motor, I didn't want to take it apart completely and rebuild it, so I would try one thing, then try another, then try another thing, just step by step trying to fix things. Right now I'm trying to take the magneto itself off because I want to do some tests. There's published values for what the resistance of the various coils should be, and so I want to test that resistance to see if there's any shorts or not. So I'm untangling all the wires and I'm trying to get it out. There's a lot of connections here that are crimped in place, so you're going to need pliers or something else to pry those connections open with. In addition, there's a grounding wire. It's grounded to this part of the shroud. So we're just going to be taking that little screw out, and that's going to let us take the terminal off and the connections off, and then the magneto will be free after that. There it is. Now it can float away. Happy little guy. So I'm cleaning off the magneto because I know that this rust can sometimes cause a problem. So I was cleaning it off the surfaces. I figured before I get too far, I may as well see if that's the issue. Now I'm going to test it. So I'm looking at my resistance. I'm looking for shorts. I'm looking to see if the resistance is within the values it should be. So this magneto has a common ground. The primary and secondary windings both go to the same ground wire, but the primary and secondary windings are supposed to be separated. When I tested this, I wasn't able to conclusively find any bad shorts from my limited understanding of how these things work. But the resistances that I measured were outside of what literature values had them at, so I figured something might be the matter with the magneto. I wasn't entirely confident though, so I got to reinstall it. This is another operation that I got to do several times over the course of this. It's the same process as before. You just bolt it on there. You take your feeler gauges, you test for the gap, you get the right gap, and then you hope that your magneto is going to produce a spark. I also had to reattach the grounding wire as well as the spark plug wire because I had taken it apart quite a ways. I then put the spark plug on the engine so that I could see if it produces a spark, like you saw earlier in the video, but it really didn't produce anything. So I come back to the condenser. This time I think, well, maybe it's the points. Maybe I just need to sharpen the points. This is really just kind of wishful thinking. I should have understood that the magneto was at fault at this point, but I kind of think this old system of points is cool. I was really hoping I could get it work. I didn't really want to go to solid state ignition, so that's why you see me taking this whole assembly off. It's more complicated than solid state ignition. There's moving parts, there's points that need to be maintained and replaced. So it is an older system, but I think it's neat. Here you'll see this is what's driving the points. It's just, there's like a little cam on the shaft inside, and this will push out and push in at different times, and that's what controls the engine timing. So you would see it depress and push in there. Here are the points. The lighting's kind of poor, but they weren't entirely straight, so I decided to take them out and fix them. Well, get them flat on some sandpaper. So I just sanded down the areas that were badly uneven, and I got both sets of points flat on the sandpaper like so. Now you can see me put them back together. They're hitting each other flat, which is what I want. The spring took me 10 minutes to put back on. This is the highlight reel here when I finally got it. And there's the points with the spring. That keeps them closed. So now I'm going to replace the point assembly. Little do I know it's not going to work, but this is still how you would replace it if yours wasn't defective the way mine was. You've got these various bolts that are going to go in first. Tighten those up. And then there's this spacer thing. I didn't really mess with it, so I just put it back the same extent. Now I can see my points below, and I just need to tighten them until they achieve the right gap. And now my thing is all set up. You can see the routing of all the various wires. So I've got my spark plug up here. This time I'm trying to make the current run through my hand. And the thing is, it's producing a spark. It's just really weak. It's supposed to shock me, but it doesn't. So I ended up ordering solid state ignition, but while I was waiting for that to come in, I decided to set up all the throttle. So here I am measuring how much that piece moves on the governor side. Here's the throttle body from the governor to the carburetor. I'm just showing how that moves again. When that moves, I want this part up here to move with it. So I want the lower part to drive the upper part, which means I need a linkage between them. There's also this, which basically applies tension to the spring, so it makes it harder or easier for the throttle to open. Here is where I have my piece of wire. This is going to be the linkage that I was talking about before, where I can link the governor to the throttle body. I'm filing this just because it wasn't fitting through the hole, as is. So now I've got the linkage in the lower part there, and you can see I need to take it upstairs, and this is going to give me a measurement of about how much I need. I put a turn in the linkage, and I'm going to adjust the linkage by altering that turn when it's on the machine. I just turn it around this piece of scrap metal. There's the little loop. That's going to let me slightly lengthen or shorten this piece of wire. Now here I am making the other, it's like a Z-turn type thing. This is just going to connect to the throttle body. So I'm pounding that flat. Now I need to bend it up, so I'm going to try and put a little crease using my chisel. And then I need to bend it up on that crease, so I'm going to hit with my hammer very carefully, very slowly. That's why I've sped up and skipped most of that. Now here it is in place. You can see as the governor moves, so does the throttle body. The two are now linked as they should be. That's what was missing before. And now the throttle cable has to connect to this whole thing. So I stick it in and I'm able to get about the length that I need. I'm just trying to get it to where it's supposed to go. These are always finicky to thread through. You just have to be persistent. Now my solid state ignition has come in. So this doesn't need the breaker, it doesn't need the points, it's just timed off the flywheel itself. So I have installed it. I checked the gap. This is maybe the 5th time I've installed the magneto on this engine. So many times. But it does work, watch. Yeah, it's a strong spark. That's what it should be. So I'm pretty confident that's going to produce the spark that I want at my spark plug. So now I just have to feed all these wires and leads through. I also want the engine kill switch to come through, so I'm trying to feed that back. There's a bladed connection forward on the magneto, so I'm going to need to add a bladed connection to this wire, which is why I already have it stripped it bare. So now I'm putting the blade on. I'm using my vice grips to crimp it. It's all crimped up. And I can just plug that onto the magneto, and that's the kill switch for the engine. So now I have to put another piece of the shroud onto the engine, so I'm altering these bolts, loosening them. I take the bolts off and then I put this piece of the shroud in to direct air over the top of the fins. Then I can replace the bolts and tension the knot nice and tight. Then I can put the front of the shroud on, as I've done many, many times before. And as I've done those other times, you just have to put these bolts back in. There's, I think, 2 at the bottom, 2 or 3 at the midpoint, 2 at the top, sides, and then 1 at the very top from what I remember. This is a little clip that holds the cable in place. It's important that you hold the cable in place. You don't want it to, say, jiggle out against the hot cooling fins, because then it might melt through and you'll end up shorting your engine. So it's always important to route cables so that they don't heat up and melt. Now I'm putting back on the pulley. You've seen this before. This shouldn't be new to you. Bolts go in. Bolts get tightened. Screen goes on. 4 screws. Let's put those 4 screws in. Tighten all 4 screws. I'm now going to put on this pulley. In this instance, that pulley would drive like the snowblower attachment on the tractor. So I tighten that on. Now I can put on the pulley and connect it to the starter. Like so. And then I'm just going to go and I'm going to tighten the head bolts in a crisscross pattern. Now I can test the engine. See, that time I had smoke when I poured a small amount of gasoline in. So this is telling me that the engine will now run. It was a very exciting moment. Which lets me go now to the exhaust system. And I've got my exhaust sealant. I don't like hot exhaust gases leaking out and going places where they can burn things. And I'm going to add a muffler because it's deafeningly loud in that enclosed garage. And even with the muffler, it's still loud, but it mitigates the noise somewhat. So I'm applying that sealant to all joints, and then I'm plugging in the muffler. This is not according to factory. This is just how I wanted to route the muffler. I wanted to clear the hood to the side. So always test this before you go ahead. Now, I don't have an air cleaner cover, so I'm going to use this little pot thing that I bought from the thrift store. I'm going to mark it at approximately center. Like so. That checks out, looks to be the middle. It's the middle enough for me, I'm satisfied. So I'm just going to mark up that dot. Now I'm going to punch where that hole will be, right in the middle. There, I've got a little mark punched in there, right in the middle. Then I'm going to try and drill this out because I want to use a bigger bolt in the carburetor. So I'm going to drill it out and I'm going to tap it. I don't want to have any fittings on the bottom. I just want the threads to go right into the carburetor body. Now I'm coming in with my tap. I'm going to tap this for the bolt that I've chosen to use. So I go really carefully. It's hard to get a good straight line. But the tap seems to go in all right, so I'm pretty happy about that. I have to later vacuum out those filings from the carburetor. But the way I've done it, now I can put this bolt, which I guess you would actually call a stud. I can thread this stud into the carburetor body. I can fit this retainer for the filter. There's the filter. I'm going to shove it into its cover that I just made. I put that cover over, and the filter now seats in there, and I can put the wing nut on and tighten it down. So now that's the whole engine put back together, even with an air filter and a muffler. Fancy stuff we were dealing with here. Now I'm going to start it, and it actually runs. So I enjoyed some success. I hope this video was helpful if you're struggling with things. Solid state ignition might be the answer for you too. Thank you for your view. I wish you all the best and have yourself a great day. Bye bye.